I used to think that monsters only lived in fairy tales, that they hid under beds and in shadows, not in smiles and silk dresses. But I was wrong, because the monster in my story wore perfume, spoke sweetly, and called herself my mother. Before I begin, I want you to stay with me till the end, because this isn't just a story about pain. It's about power, forgiveness, and the kind of peace you can only earn after you've lost everything. So if you've ever been silenced, forgotten, or replaced, this story is yours too. Please like, subscribe, and stay till the end. I promise you won't forget it. I was 10 when my father remarried. My real mother had been gone for 3 years. Cancer took her quietly, the way it takes everything gentle. My father said he couldn't live in loneliness anymore. So, one afternoon, he brought her home, Amira. She wore a red scarf that day. I remember because my mother used to wear the same shade on I. at first. She smiled at me like she wanted to love me. But there was something hollow in her eyes. Something that said she didn't see me. She saw a burden. I tried to be what she wanted. Quiet. Obedient, invisible. But invisible children don't get hugs. They get forgotten birthdays, cold stares, and slammed doors. My father never noticed. He was too busy holding her hand, pretending our broken home was whole again. She would whisper to him when she thought I wasn't listening. "She's just like her mother," she'd say. "Too emotional, too weak." And he'd sigh. That tired sigh that told me he was giving up on me too. I stopped talking after that. At school, I was the girl with the blank face. At home, I was the ghost in the corner. Every morning, she'd give my father his breakfast first. The fresh eggs, the buttered toast, and leave the leftovers for me. Once, I found a lipstick mark on the cup she handed me. She looked at me and said, "Drink it. You should learn to share what's not yours." I was 12 when she took my room. She said it was better for her baby, their baby. I moved into the storage room with old trunks, my mother's sewing machine, and the smell of dust. My father told me to be understanding. "She's carrying a child," he said. "Don't make things difficult." I smiled. Because I'd already learned, in this house, my silence was the only language they understood. The day my stepbrother was born, my father cried with joy. He kissed her forehead, held the baby, and said, "My son." And that's when I realized I'd been erased. Completely. I remember standing at the door, watching them, the picture-perfect family. My stepmother looked at me and smiled. That same soft, poisonous smile. She whispered, "Now you finally know your place." From that day on, I stopped waiting to be loved. I learned to survive without warmth, without touch, without belonging. I studied quietly, read every book I could find. At night, when they slept, I'd turn on the dim light in the storage room and teach myself everything I was never taught. Accounting, literature, even coding. My father used to say girls didn't need education, but he said it less. When I stopped asking for help, the years passed. I became the house's shadow, silent, unseen, but always watching. Amira became everything she wanted, the perfect wife, the center of attention. And I became the invisible daughter who carried the weight of their comfort. But even shadows learn to grow. When I turned 17, I got a scholarship. It was to a city university, far away from home. I told my father, but Amira intercepted the letter before he could see it. She tore it in front of me. She said, "You think you're smarter than me? You think you'll leave us and become something? You're nothing without us." I still remember how her nails dug into my wrist when she said that. I didn't cry. Not this time. That night, I packed my old backpack and ran. No note, no goodbye. Just the sound of my footsteps echoing through the street. like a heartbeat that finally belonged to me. I lived in a hostel for years, worked in a small cafe during the day, studied at night. Sometimes I'd stare at the city lights and think of the house I left, of the child I used to be. And every time, I'd whisper to her, "You'll never go back. Not until you have everything they said you couldn't." Years went by. I graduated, got a job at a firm, worked harder than anyone else because for me, success wasn't ambition. It was survival. One evening, after a long day, I received a message. It was from a lawyer. He said my father wanted to see me. I didn't know what to feel. Anger, fear, pity. I hadn't seen him in 10 years. When I entered the house again, everything felt smaller. The walls were the same, but the air was heavier, older. My father sat in a wheelchair. Amira stood beside him, her face painted with worry. Her hair was thinner. Her perfume smelled the same. He looked at me, and for the first time in my life, I saw guilt. "My daughter," he whispered. "I made mistakes." His voice cracked. "I thought I was protecting you. I was wrong." Amira turned away. She couldn't look at me. Maybe because she knew forgiveness was something I no longer carried. He told me the company he built was failing. The inheritance, the business, everything slipping away. He wanted me to help save it. Me, the daughter they'd thrown away. I could have refused. I could have walked out and never looked back. But something in me wanted closure, not revenge, just peace. I agreed. And what happened next changed everything. The day I walked back into my father's company, every wall whispered with ghosts. The marble floors still gleamed, but the energy was cold, like the life had drained out of it. They had renamed everything. The logo, the boardroom, even the corner office that used to have my mother's photograph, replaced now with Amira's smiling portrait. It was strange how much a place could look alive and still feel like a graveyard. When I entered, the employees looked at me curiously. Some recognized my face, a distant shadow from a forgotten past. Others didn't know who I was. To them, I was just a consultant sent to clean up the mess. But that's exactly what I wanted them to think. I wasn't here to make a scene. I was here to rewrite the ending. My father introduced me quietly. He said, "This is my daughter, Aisha. She'll be helping us restructure." Amira smiled. That same hollow smile from years ago. But this time, I didn't look away. I smiled back, calm, poised, untouchable. For a second, I saw something flicker in her eyes. Fear. The kind that comes when you realize the person you tried to bury has come back standing taller than you ever imagined. I began my work silently, methodically. The company was drowning in debt, mismanagement, overspending, and poor leadership. Amira had been making most of the decisions since my father's health declined. She had turned his empire into her little vanity project. Lavish parties, useless expansions. She was spending money to keep her image, not the company alive. I didn't say a word at first. I just observed, listened, took notes. I stayed late after everyone left, going through files and transactions, learning every fracture and flaw. Because when you've grown up surviving in silence, you learn to see everything others miss. My father would watch me sometimes from his wheelchair. He didn't speak much, but his eyes did. They were tired, full of a guilt he didn't know how to express. I didn't hate him anymore. I pitied him. He had chosen comfort over courage, and it had cost him everything. Amira, however, began to feel threatened. She'd walk into meetings uninvited, interrupting me, correcting me in front of the staff. She'd whisper, "Remember who you're speaking to. Aisha, I'm still the lady of this house." But her words no longer had power, because I finally knew who I was, and she knew it too. One night, I stayed back late again. As I went through some old ledgers, I found something that made my heart go still. It was my mother's handwriting. Her name, her initials, the foundation signatures. She had co-founded this company. Half of everything belonged to her, to me. But when my father remarried, those documents had been quietly buried under revisions and transfers. Amira's doing. She had erased my mother, not just from her home, but from her own legacy. I sat there for a long time that night, staring at her signature. I felt the same ache I felt as a child in that storage room, the one where my mother's sewing machine sat, gathering dust. Except this time, I wasn't powerless anymore. The next morning, I made copies, legal copies, and I started quietly rebuilding what they destroyed. I contacted old partners who had left because of Amira's arrogance. I reopened dormant accounts, rewrote proposals. In less than 6 months, we were back in profit. The same employees who once whispered about me now came to me for direction. And my father began to smile again. A small, fragile smile. But real. One evening, after a board meeting, Amira cornered me in the hallway. Her tone was sharp. "So, this is your revenge," she hissed. "Taking my company, my family, my husband's name?" I looked at her and said softly, "It was never yours to begin with. You just borrowed what didn't belong to you." Her face turned pale. She stepped closer, her voice trembling with anger. "You'll never belong here, Aisha. No matter how hard you try, you'll always be the unwanted child." I smiled faintly. "Maybe, but at least I'm not the woman who spent her life pretending to be something she's not." She didn't reply. She just stared at me, like she finally saw what she'd created. The quiet girl she once silenced had learned to roar without raising her voice. After that, things began to unravel for her. Her mismanagement came to light. Her fake expenses, her hidden accounts, all exposed by my audits. I didn't have to ruin her. Her own greed did that for me. My father called me to his room one night. He was weak, thinner than I remembered. He held my hand and whispered, "Your mother would be proud of you." Tears welled in his eyes. I let her memory fade. "You brought it back." I didn't know what to say. For the first time, I let myself cry in front of him. Because after all these years, I realized I wasn't doing this for revenge. I was doing it for her. For the woman who gave me life, and for the little girl who never got to live it. When my father passed away 2 months later, I didn't feel anger, just peace. He had died knowing the truth, and that was enough. At the funeral, people came and went, offering condolences. Amira stood beside me, pretending to be the grieving widow, but her eyes were restless, because she knew what was coming. A week later, the will was read, and when the lawyer opened the file, the room fell silent. My father had left everything to me. The company, the estate, the legacy. Amira's lips trembled. She looked at me, her eyes full of disbelief. "How could he?" she whispered. After everything I did for him, I didn't answer, because some things don't need to be said. The silence between us was enough, heavy, poetic, final. But it wasn't triumph I felt. It was something softer, bittersweet. Because winning doesn't always heal what was broken. It just stops the bleeding. I walked through the house that night, the same one where I grew up. Every corner held echoes of who I used to be. And when I entered the old storage room, I found it still there. My mother's sewing machine, covered in dust, but untouched. I wiped it gently, whispering, "We're home now." But the story wasn't over yet. Because Amira, the woman who once took everything from me, wasn't done losing. After the will was read, silence fell over the house like a ghost that refused to leave. For the first time in my life, The walls didn't echo with Amira's laughter or my father's voice. Just the creaking of old wood and the whispers of memories too heavy to rest. I didn't celebrate the inheritance. There were no smiles, no champagne, no satisfaction. Only a quiet stillness, the kind that comes when you've waited your whole life to breathe freely, and then realize you've forgotten how. I spent the next few weeks settling the company, finalizing paperwork, and reorganizing leadership. Everywhere I went, people looked at me with a strange mix of awe and fear. The forgotten daughter had become the honor. The woman they once pitied now signed their paychecks, but power wasn't what I wanted. It was peace. And peace doesn't live in revenge. It lives in closure. Emira, though, couldn't understand that. She moved through the house like a shadow, fragile, bitter, lost. The parties stopped. The visitors stopped. Her friends, who once circled her like bees around honey, disappeared the moment the money did. I would find her sitting by the window some evenings, staring at the driveway, waiting, perhaps, for a driver who no longer came, for a husband who would never return, for a life that had finally stopped revolving around her one afternoon. I came home early from the office and found her in the garden, the one my mother used to tend. She was sitting on the bench, holding one of my mother's old scarves. Her face looked softer somehow. Smaller. I used to envy her, she said quietly, not looking at me. She had everything. A husband who adored her, a daughter who looked up to her, a house filled with love. And I thought, if I could take her place, maybe I'd have all that too. Her voice broke. But I never got it. Did I? Not really. For the first time, I didn't see a villain. I saw a woman broken by her own choices. A woman who had chased love like a mirage and ended up dying of thirst. In the middle of her own desert. I never wanted to hate you, I said softly. But you made it so easy. She turned toward me, her eyes wet. I know, and I can't undo it. But you won, Aisha. You got everything back. I shook my head slowly. No, Amira, I didn't win. I just stopped losing. We sat there in silence, two women bound by pain, separated by choices. The wind rustled the leaves, and for a brief second, I thought I could feel my mother's presence between us. Gentle, forgiving, free. That night, I made a decision. I didn't want to live in that house anymore. Too many ghosts, too many echoes. So I sold it, every piece, every memory, every trace of the life that had suffocated me for years. But I didn't sell the sewing machine. That I took with me, because it wasn't just a memory. It was a promise. I moved into a small apartment in the city. Simple, quiet, mine. I started a foundation, one named after my mother, to help young girls who had lost their mothers too soon. Girls like me. I hired teachers, counselors, and therapists. We called it the Amina home. Every time a girl smiled there, I felt like a piece of my mother's love was being reborn. Her name, the one Amira tried to erase, now stood carved in silver letters on the building's front gate. And as for Amira, she faded. The company board voted her out after discovering years of hidden debts. She sold her jewelry, her cars, her gowns, everything she once used to feel powerful. Last I heard, she moved into a smaller house on the outskirts, alone. Sometimes, I visit the cemetery. I bring flowers for both of them, my mother and my father. I place white lilies for her because she loved their softness, and for him, a single red rose, forgiveness. Because in the end, I realized, people don't always destroy you out of malice. Sometimes they destroy you out of weakness. Standing there, I whisper, I kept your promise, Mama. You said one day I'd rise, and I did. Not by breaking others, not by revenge, but by remembering who I was and who you taught me to be. One evening, I got a letter. It was handwritten, shaky, unsteady. It was from Amira. She wrote, I walk by the store sometimes and see the girls from your foundation laughing. It makes me think, maybe this is what real legacy looks like. Not buildings or jewelry, but healing. I hope you can forgive me, even if I can't forgive myself. I folded the letter carefully and placed it inside my mother's old diary. Because forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting. It means freeing yourself from the weight of remembering. Years later, when I look at my reflection now, I don't see the broken girl anymore. I see a woman who turned pain into power, silence into strength, and loss into legacy. And every time someone asks me how I found the courage to rebuild from ashes, I tell them, when you grow up in darkness long enough, even a single spark can become your sunrise. The world had once taken my mother's name, my home, my childhood. But in the end, I took something far greater, peace. And I learned that peace is the loudest form of revenge. Because she took my childhood, but I took their legacy.